This is a question on practice for lay people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how should a lay person practice if their goal is nibbana?
Or at least some stage towards it, I presume.
Yeah.
Because you can't attain nibbana as a layperson. The suttas are pretty clear on that. But that doesn't mean you can't practice towards it. Yeah. So, well, you would practice in the same way the monks do, just on the basis of a greater compromise of a household life. But the practice does not somehow miraculously become different because you can't leave your home, or you can't leave your family, or you have a duty towards it, and then you can do a different thing towards the same goal of nibbana. No, it's still the same practice. So often it can feel like a high standard for a lay person to achieve, like keeping the 8 precepts, celibate, practice towards the right view, or maybe even non-return. All of that's possible. All of that was in the suttas recorded. But what also always those what those suttas would always also say was quite clearly that in order for one to practice successfully, whether a monk or a layperson, he needs to understand the peril of sensuality. The mind needs to be free from hindrances on the basis of thorough virtue and sense restraint. So then the difference basically was only, it wasn't in the path they were applying themselves to. The difference was simply in the circumstances they were keeping them back, but the practice was the same. So if it feels like a tall order, it's normal, it's going to feel that way, and it's fine to feel that way, but it's important to not then try to devalue or lower the threshold. Oh, because it just seems so unattainable, so give me something simpler. No, quite the opposite. If actually the goal and the threshold remains high, even your failure to reach it will constitute more successful practice than successfully practicing towards a lower threshold, towards something that's not the beginning of the Dhamma, but you are led to believe it is. The good example of that is this, it seems to be quite, I don't know how prevalent, but I think there are probably quite a few people that kind of delusionally believe, whether through their own doing or because they were led astray, that you can keep the 5 precepts and practice the Dhamma as a layperson. It's like, no. You look at any sutta, whenever the Buddha taught the 5 precepts, it was just to get better rebirths, heavenly rebirths, to enjoy sensuality further, instructing the spouses, how to look after each other, how to be faithful, because they're going to get great sensual rewards. And it was quite clearly not presented as the Noble Eightfold Path, the one way only towards purification of being, the Satipatthana and Noble Eightfold Path. It was clearly presented to those who don't want to practice, who are not interested in practicing. So it's like, okay, well, still, if you have a degree of virtue on the level of 5 precepts, a degree of honesty, a degree of reasoning, looking after your family. The Buddha was teaching people how to spend their money. So that's what I mean, it's quite delusional to believe that these things somehow also lead you to Nibbana, when the context in the suttas was quite clear. However, whenever there were lay people, quite, the foremost, Nandamata, the foremost in Jhanas, a lay woman, all the other householders, they had many disciples. They were all fully established in virtue, 8 precepts, so the perils of sensuality, sense restraint, all of that. And that's how they got where they were. And then you also had lay people in the suttas. There were sotapannas or sakadagamis, but they were living by 5 precepts. But that was after they got their right view, because they were lucky enough to talk to the Buddha and the Buddha to guide them step by step. Then they went back home and were content with that attainment, and then kept the 5 precepts and remained being a good person. But they were clearly not practicing further. And when the Buddha did instruct, for example, Anattapindika, the famous instruction, before he even started talking anything about the Dhamma to him, he first, obviously, the generosity, the merit that you make, elevated mind, talking about the heavens, the good rebirths. And then he was talking about the perils of sensuality, the absolute deprivation of sensual desires, the bait, the trap, the suffering, all of that. And then he said, then his mind was ready to hear the Dhamma. And then he taught him Dhamma, he got a right view. So if today you're taught the Dhamma, you're not getting the right view. Why is that? Well, because you're not seeing the depth of the perils of sensuality. And that's why it wasn't taught generally to lay people, the Dhamma, for, who knows, half of the Buddha's life probably. Quite a few decades.
Yeah, because it says in the Suttas, we do not teach this.
We do not teach this to
no,
because they would leave. It's incompatible. So now, obviously, as I said, the people have all this access to the suttas and so on. Plus, let's not even get into, the whole idea of you can practice meditation and meditation techniques that somehow lead you to the meat of the practice on the basis of your 5 precepts or something. There's no such sutta at all. And even Satipatthana, as we said before, or Anapanasati, was taught to noble disciples, or if they were just short of noble disciples, it was still taught to the monks, at least who were fully ready for that through sense restraint and virtue in terms of the gradual training. So this whole view that you can kind of be a householder, keep the 5 precepts, do your best in that regard, and do your meditation technique, and somehow that constitutes your practice for Dhamma. Just think about it. Like, if monks who would have given up a lot more need to do all these other things in terms of the Buddha's instruction, the detailed instruction and repetitive and constantly having to remind them and a right sense of urgency, they still need to do a lot on the basis of already having done a lot, giving up the household, the attachments, the bonds, all of that. But they need to do a lot. But then you have somebody who hasn't even given all of that up and needs to do even less for the same practice. That's simply irrational, even if you think about it. Put aside that the suttas simply don't support that idea. Just stop and think about it. Surely it would be the other way around. Surely if somebody would not have given up the big part of obstruction for the holy life, for the goal of the holy life, would need to do then even a lot more just to compensate for that compromise. And somebody who would have given it already up and lives already in a higher kind of in a higher environment of sense restraint, well, they would need to do the less. So the point is, if you feel disheartened, but it's just so much, it's fine. But don't obscure the fact that that's the threshold. Once you sort of calm down and come to terms with it, if you still keep trying towards that which feels too much, you are actually still getting closer to it, even through your failures. So keep the 5 precepts, and then keep the 8 precepts every now and then, but keep them really unconditionally. And don't look for meditation techniques to compensate for your intentionally chosen unsuitable environment, but take responsibility for it. And then feel the weight of that choice, feel the weight of the compromise. And through doing that, you are actually on the right track. Even if you never become a monk, you are still practicing more rightly than somebody who would have lowered the threshold just because the threshold they hear upsets them. It makes them feel bad, or it makes them feel disheartened and they don't want to do anything. No, the threshold remains the same. Think about it. If there is a peak of the mountain you have to climb to, it's not negotiable. That is the peak. And if you don't aim in the direction of that peak because it's too much and start walking in the opposite direction, you're not getting closer to the peak. Even if you climb other mountains, it's not the one you should be climbing. So the point is to recognize that, it feels too high. I don't even know I can do it. But at least if I don't lower it down, just to please myself, my ignorant self, my aims will be aiming high where they should. And when you aim high, even when you fail, you fail relatively higher than you were before. And same principle in education or in any other field. Like if you aim for like a higher goal or a more kind of accurate sort of higher purpose, even your failure will be a relative success.
Yeah, there's a
but if I lower the threshold and tell you, oh no, just do this, well, you're gonna aim even lower now. You're gonna fall even lower than that. And that's the whole point. So it's not like all this insistence on censorship and stuff. It's not just to dishearten and this is just for the monks. No, it's for anybody who wants to practice the Dhamma. And this is the beginning of the Dhamma. If you read the Suttas, you will arrive at the very same conclusion. You don't have to take my word for it. And even like, as I said, Nanda Mata that I mentioned, she was like Anagami. And when she talked about herself, she said, and she had a husband and she had a kid before. But she said, even then, since she was a young girl, when she was given to her husband in marriage, she was never unfaithful to him, even in her thought, let alone in the body of speech. So you realize that she was already quite a developed human being. Like, how many people today can say that even mentally they don't transregress? They don't have a thought of sensuality. So you realize she was dutiful. She bore him a kid. When he died, she immediately became celibate. She was simply not interested in any of that since way before. And then when her own son was imprisoned, falsely accused, killed, she didn't go and fight the king for injustice. She said her mind remained unchanged. And then decided to put the praise there. Like, oh wow, you can purify thoughts in their manifestations. As they manifest, they're already clear. So it's like, yeah, a layperson can do that. And even back then, that was impressive. There were monks who couldn't do that. So it's like, it's not about, oh, you must become a monk or a nun. It's about, you mustn't lower the threshold. And then keep trying towards that level and understand that even if you're failing in regard to the right direction. So you are actually going forward. Maybe not as fast as you would like to or as others would promise you, but you are going forward. Through that repetition of failure of the right aim, you are climbing.
So some people might say that, okay, well, I'm not so good with my virtue. I keep 5 precepts every now and then, 8 precepts every now and then. I fail at it. But I compensate that with meditation technique, whatever.
Yeah, well, you have basically the whole Visuddhimagga, commentaries, the whole Abhidhamma to blame for that. There was a complete invention when they tried to popularize Buddhism for masses. I think I told you, I think it was a Buddhaghosa who said, the Visuddhimagga compiler, who said he hopes that his work will inspire people, whereby even common householders will speak about meditation on a daily basis. Because it's it became quite associated with the whole national pride, religion, the whole idea of it. And so it's no wonder that virtue had to suffer on account of it, the threshold of virtue, because that's one thing that your average householder doesn't want to hear, doesn't want to do. So if you lower that and present some more instantaneously gratifying yogic, tantric, hypnotic meditation techniques, then you would get probably quite a few followers in that regard. And ever since, even the whole the Thai tradition and Boran Kamatan and the Thai forest meditation, you look at the history of it, it just came exactly from these Abhidhammic views mixed with Tibetan and Chinese Tantra and in sort of visualization practices and stuff. And again,
intention for popularizing.
Yeah, came from the same source. From the same source. And then even people and see why that's so dangerous. Like even people who would have committed for right reasons to the practice, if that's where they arrive at, thinking that's what the Buddha actually taught, they wouldn't look further and they'll be doing this nonsense instead of doing the right thing they were perfectly capable of doing if they were told. So and same in Burma, the whole Vipassana movement was taught by that minister to the teacher of Mahasi, like king's minister or something, because again, he was very bound with the Buddhist identity, colonial times, the pressures and stuff. So it was like, let's find a sutta that can serve as a basis, and then created these technique practices, which, by the way, are quite helpful management for people. Management techniques like any other sort of practices you might do to help, like, relieve the stress.
Yeah.
But confusing that for the Buddhist practice, it's pretty much confusing basically treating of a random symptom for the illness. And then when the symptom disappears, you think you're cured now, while actually your illness is deteriorating. That's why it's the most perilous thing to do in that sense. You read the suttas, the instruction to lay people, 5 precepts, 8 precepts when you can, more often better, great. Obviously, fulfill your other duties, but then at the same time reflect on the nature of enlightenment, reflect on the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Obviously, it's always presented in that way, through the oral transmission. Lots of details were lost, but you could extrapolate from that and see, well, what would be the qualities, the properties of an enlightened mind? Well, it would be obviously disgust with sensuality, freedom from any physical cravings, freedom from conceit. So all of these contexts, all of these ideas, think about, sit down for an hour, and instead of watching your belly rising up and down, think about the property of being free from conceit, and try and apply it. On the basis of your whatever limited virtue, limited sense restraint, still work in the same direction. As I said, the path does not magically become different just because you can't do this. It's still the same practice. Pick up any other quality, same. Different times, different reflections, but invest time in it. And then try to apply it. So when you end up in situations that provoke your conceit, provoke your lust, provoke your anger, that's the training now. Tame the animal in regard to this, within my compromised environment for which I have taken up responsibility. So even like that's something like, and that's why it's you realize like all you can do is say these things basically to people, because at least 1 in 100 when they hear it, they will be able to do it, and the reason they were able to do it is because they actually heard it. They were told. They can't have an excuse to say, well, I was never told. Because it's kind of like the whole direction of what people like to think the practice is, it's not incidental, that kind of, it does go with the general flow of nature, kind of preferences and so on. It kind of just tailors to that. So even if, as I said, even if people were maybe misled, somebody told you this is the practice, an enlightened mind will quite happily leap onto that and proliferate further and defend it and so on and not question it. So yes, you might have been misled, but if you would have heard the other alternative like this and still irrationally chose this without any questioning, well, now that's your own doing. So that's what I mean. All you can do is keep saying it, because some people, at least when they hear it, well, they can't just go back to what they were doing before without asking certain questions. And if you start asking them, you'll see how quickly the whole view will dissolve and how much it doesn't add up. Because the suttas are completely unambiguous about it. When the Buddha talked to lay people, when he was telling them how to look after the wives or kings, how to rule, it was nothing to do with freedom from Nibbana, Noble Eightfold Path, and the Dhamma. Yeah. Sorry, freedom from samsara, Nibbana, and the Dhamma. It was for the heavenly rebirths, for the better life here and now. It was because they clearly didn't want to practice. So he would not have wasted the practice instruction. They would have been misunderstood and misconstrued to somebody not even willing to hear it. And when those lay people were instructed, it was exactly on the same basis as the monks were.
Because there's the keep the 5 precepts, you'll go to heaven.
Yeah.
You'll enjoy sensual pleasures there.
Exactly.
But then there's the danger of those sensual pleasures.
Yeah. And see, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's the point. That becomes a seriously mistaken and perilous position when, for whatever reason, that became understood as the practice of the Dhamma as well. Okay. And that's just delusional, as I said.
But it's the idea that the virtue is not even the 5 precepts is not important, but the meditation is the core. That is even worse, because
it's completely upside down.
Because even if you keep the 5 precepts and you're aiming for the heavens, still you are in a way practicing the good path.
You're not drifting away too far away from the starting point. You're not practicing the path.
Yeah,
but absolutely. As I said before, by keeping the 5 precepts, which is the Buddha said the bare minimum, you're at least, as I said, not too far off. So when you do take the 8 precepts or start to practice sense restraint or reflect on these right, correct contexts and so on, you are actually close to where things would be starting. But if you're not even keeping the 5 precepts and just doing some meditation or occasionally keeping the precepts when you're on the retreat, that's, as I said, you can do whatever you want to manage your suffering, and it's absolutely fine. There's really no problem. The problem is when all those absolutely worldly, misguided in terms of the Dhamma managements are seen as the practice of the Dhamma. That's the worst thing you can do, really. That's even worse than somebody who is making no effort to practice, but at least is not obscuring what the practice actually is.
And when you relegate virtue as being unimportant, that meditation insights, meditation experiences as being the core, then if you're a monk, then or a layperson, it means, what's the point of being monastic? It's absolutely
in a way, exactly,
pointless.
Exactly. Then anybody, if the practice, everybody has access to the practice through a meditation technique. Everything else secondary to it.
Yeah.
But it's obviously it's like the mainstream view. Most people do it, and most people say, "Well, but I find it helpful." Nobody doubts that. Nobody denies that. But you need to really start looking into where the whole thing came from, because you're not going to find it in the suttas. And whenever people say, "Oh, it comes from this suttas," it's always quite a leap to make those connections. And then people would sometimes just accept it, that it came from the suttas, because it was presented. The suttas were presented to them through these meditation techniques, and they haven't really looked into them and studied them for themselves.
Yeah.
But there were books written on the whole origins of the modern jhana views and stuff. Maybe we can even link them, like a couple of like full-on scholastic books, not just somebody expressing their view like I'm doing now, and then quote the suttas, which, as I said, are fairly generic. People can interpret them whichever way they want. No, this was like a scholarly research on the basis of other research, full-on like investigative work, where it's just, there's no doubt. Like even people that practice the Buddha goes jhana method and whatnot, that had nothing to do with the Buddhist jhanas actually, even those scholars know that didn't come from the suttas. They just accept and and think Buddha Gosa knew what he was talking about. But there is absolutely no disagreement that has come 10 centuries later, 11. And by that time, there was a lot, already 3 centuries after the Buddha passed away, it was already, by the time those Sangha councils were coming, it was already different takes, yogic influences and whatnot. So it's just to show you that, okay, you can do whatever you want, but if you want to claim it to be the Dhamma and the practice for uprooting of the suffering and so on, you need to go back to the suttas that, as I said, there is quite a wide consensus, the early texts, what they were, and really study them on their own merit, not interpret them through your own, as I said, breath massage, tantric technique, and try to read into it. No, just look what it says, forget what you know, and what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you read Anapanasati Sutta? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is it wasn't taught to householders. The second thing that comes to my mind, it was taught to people with the right view or with at least fully established virtue, sense restraint, beyond any doubt. Yeah. So it's you want to get in these other subsequent technicalities of jhana, of Anapanasati steps, well, you got to meet these technicalities first. Is my life approximating that of a fully established in virtue, celibacy, sense restraint? Whereby I could say, well, it does apply to me, or no. Again, you could say, oh, well, my teacher told me it doesn't have to. Well, we're not talking about your teacher. We're talking about the early Buddhist texts, the suttas, that are, as I said, widely agreed. Okay, this is the closest to what the Buddha actually taught. and most likely it was from the historical figure that did teach these things, do those texts allow you to be a householders with the occasional 5 precepts, doing higher satipatthanas and anapanasati and 4 jhana? Not a chance by any stretch. And now you have a choice. Again, you could say, okay, I don't like this. I do prefer my lay jhana teacher and I'll follow him. That's fine. But you were told, and there is plenty of evidence to even prove that point, scholastic investigative works and stuff, that those are 2 different things. Because I would see sometimes people go, oh no, well, there's the Buddha jhana, and then there is this jhana, this Ajna's jhana. It's like, well, no, there is jhana, full stop. There is no 16 types of jhana. All the subsequent jhanas are the ones that fail to understand or attain the Buddha's jhana, the jhana from the early texts. Otherwise, you wouldn't come up with your own practice of jhana. So it's simply not optional. And if the choice is clear, as I said before in other talks, you might even surprise yourself. You think now, maybe you think, oh, it's just too much to do all that. And once you're clear, once you calm down in your initial shock, because, for 20 years you've been doing it this way, you might surprise yourself and realize, actually, I am kind of doing it like this, rightly now. I don't have actually problem with the sense restraint as much as I thought I did.
I could even do it more.
Occasionally I take on the 8 precepts. Let me take it on for longer. Let me now improve like the restraint and the practice in regard to the speech, the action revolving around speech. Or let me now, like Nanda Mata, purify thoughts in their manifestation. Without relying on any management technique. Just as they arise, I see through them. Again, she was a laywoman with probably lots of duties and stuff and pressures, and she did all of that. So it's like, if as a householder you can become an anagami, that's a pretty good deal. But again, the practice is the same. And that's another thing, because like, okay, so could you become anagami, somebody who is fully, utterly, completely destroyed, the 5 lower fetters, it's above sensuality or ill will, while practicing sexual activity? Like, put everything, put all the text aside, all the teachings, just use clear reason, just pure logic, straightforward reflection, and see, can you do this and get this as a result of that? And see if that's just wishful thinking and a complete kind of, as I said, misled belief. Because it's impossible. By any stretch, if you just stop and think about it, you realize, no, of course, if I want to be beyond sensuality, I have to start emulating that. I have to start not giving into it. It's like a heroin addict, through shooting up drugs, genuinely believes, if he were to genuinely believe, that he will go beyond his addiction. Through feeding it every single day, he will go beyond it. And you don't even need to become a heroin addict to realize that that's not how sensuality works. And somehow you do have views of, I can just keep the 5 precepts the best I can and practice for anagami.
The destruction of
and I find this secret pleasure hidden in the jhana that will then make me abandon the whole sensuality and never look back again. And again, you look at the actual suttas, and it's a very different picture painted there.
You can't get the pleasure of renunciation by not renouncing it.
Yeah. So in a way, it's actually like, I was just imagining, like, if I were a household and somebody tells me this, and it's like, well, actually, that's kind of better. I don't have to be relying on the magic of techniques and attainments. I had a special experience, Ajahn, what does it mean, and stuff like that, and then depend on someone else's word. Keep the 5 precepts. Keep the 8 when you can. Do it as often as you can. Moderate your engagement and compromise of sensuality and other things. And then you have plenty of opportunities for practice. People will be provoking you to say stuff, to think stuff, and you realize every single day you're served on a plate things that can directly lead to improvement of your chitta or defilement of it. But you got to do the work. And it's like, yeah, actually, it's quite reasonable if somebody takes on that kind of work, even if it's 5, occasional 8, 5, occasional 8, but does all of this, does not mask or manage through techniques and mystical experiences and hypnotic trances, because there is a good chance you could get the right view. Or at least be like on the level of a Dhammanusari and then get the right view at the moment of death or something.
Your mind will be very clean.
Well, the mind is actually being worked properly, as opposed to just hypnotized, distracted, enticed with more sensuality to look away from this sensuality. No. You are taking it on rightly. Yes, you're not going to be an arahant, but being a sotapanna, it's, as the Buddha said himself in those suttas, it's worth being, like stuck by 100 spears every day for 100 years. If at the end of that you were to get the Sotapanna, it would be worth going through that pain. So, nothing stopping you, really. Nothing stopping anyone, except their wrong views and misplaced emphasis on what really the practice is and what's important.
Because although that's difficult and it's painful, a wise person would see that this pain is worth.
This pain is the practice.
Yeah, is the practice, because look at the results would be clarity of mind, steadiness of heart, so to speak.
Yeah. Taming of the animal.
And as a layperson, if you are still attached to your family and concerned with your children, your wife, wouldn't it be best if you had a clean mind, clean behavior,
non-clouded perspective in regard to what's best for them? Would
that not inspire your own family?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you be teaching your children the right way to live?
If you're beyond ill will, beyond sensual,
isn't that the best thing that you should be doing for your family?
And it's also good in other ways, obviously. I usually don't talk about that because generally it's for like a wide audience. But the Buddha said himself, offering, feeding, helping a virtuous person will be like immeasurable merit. Offering, feeding, helping a sotapanna, even more. Sakadagami, even more. Anagami, even arahant. So if you yourself are actually the one with developed citta, as a householder, developed citta, developed virtue, on the way for the right view, Dhammanusari, Sadhanusari, committing to it rightly, anything good your wife, kids, friends do to you will be multiplied by thousandfold for them. In terms of, because there's the whole sutta that talks about purification of gifts and offerings through virtue of the receiver, virtue of the giver, or both. And it's like you are practicing for the benefit. Animals, they do something good for you. If you are one with a purified citta, they're going to reap manifold benefit from that. If you were not, it's probably not going to last for long. So it's beneficial one way or the other.
Yeah, you are becoming
and that's what I mean, like, and all this is in the suttas. Like, you read this, it's like, actually, that is perfectly doable. Because yes, many people would have valid reasons, already have, a growing family or people that depend on them, maybe not as much as back in the day in India, where you would leave your family means, okay, they're done. But still, there is degree of responsibility and involvement, and they can't just now, it's too late, so to speak. It's too late to just give it up and become a monk because all of this. But it's like, okay, but it's not too late to internally start walking in the right direction on the basis of their compromised environment, take on that pain of untamed citta being faced correctly, tame it through virtue, 5 precepts, they keep you not drifting away from the practice, 8 precepts that align you more with the practice, the right reflections, even the reflections on your own family. See, your children are your bond. What happens to bonds? What happens to those who are bonded? Well, make your meditation around that every other day. One day think about the virtue, the value of enlightenment, the value of immovable citta. Another day think about the perils of sensuality. Sure, engage with sensuality when you have to, as I said, in a moderate way, but that still doesn't exempt you from thinking how bad it is. Think about the danger of the bond. Think about your children dying before you. Would your mind remain immoved like Nandamatas did? It's like, oh, you wouldn't. So I got to work towards that. And you don't need to abandon children in order to do their work. So there's no excuse to not do the work. That's my point. Even if you say, I can't become a monk, okay, still have to do the same work. Oh, I can't become celibate because I have duty towards wife. Okay, fine. Still think those same themes contexts, and contemplations. They will keep you in check, but it's going to be unpleasant because obviously you're in them and thinking them. It's like, but that is your training there. If you abandon that and become a monk, as in that environment, and become a monk, you're going to have different types of unpleasantness to think about. But one way or the other, it has to come because we all start with an untamed chitta. We all start with a wild animal that does need to be reined in and then fed these perceptions, as the Sutta says, kept in front of it until it sees for itself.